Good evening, everyone, and good morning to Matthew and Julie and Dr. Palaniappan and everyone else in the US. I'd like to welcome you to our event at Re-Cognising Dance today. Just before Mahalakshmi introduces the event, I'd like to just, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, to tell you a little bit about recognizing dance. Sorry, Re-Cognising Dance. I keep calling it recognizing dance, but it is actually recognizing. So this is a platform started by Mahalakshmi and myself a few months ago, actually more than a few months ago, in August. And it was a platform that we decided to start to bring about discussions and conversations and dialogue on important issues in the dance world in India, and not just so we wanted to discuss the issues that are coming up in discourses around dance today, whether it's to do with dance history or even contemporary issues. So we did have a series of conversations with scholars such as Dr. Saskia Kirstenbohm, Dr. Amrit Srinivasan, Dr. Yashoda Thakur, to discuss dance history. We've also had a series called Discouraged, which is to discuss more contemporary issues and to address the younger members of the dance practitioners and our practitioners who have real concerns about dance today in today's world. So our first edition of Discouraged was to discuss the various forms in which dancers are discouraged to dance, and we're hoping to have a few more of such editions, which will be more specific to particular areas of discouragement. With that, so at the moment we're an online platform, and all of our conversations happen on Zoom. But we're hoping that we will soon have a website, and we'll be able to take this work to larger platforms as well. And all of our videos are available on YouTube. All of our past events are available for viewing on YouTube on our channel Recognizing Dance. And with that, I'd like to ask Mahalakshmi to introduce today's event and the speakers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aranyani. It's a real pleasure having all of you here, and some of you who always turn up for all our events, from scholars like Dr. Amrit, Dr. Avanti, and other students of dance like Devina, and so many. I'm sorry, I'm not able to take all your names. So over the past couple of months, all our events have focused on, so far, the social history of dance and the Devadasi system and so on. And Arinyani and me realized a lot of our impressions are very black and white, and we aren't, and we come with a lot of preconceived notions. And the people and these movements involved are either glorified or vilified. So we thought we should have this event, this discussion with two wonderful scholars, Dr. Devika and Dr. Matthew, Professor Matthew. And I don't want to take time away by introducing them. We've already shared their bios and CVs with all of you, and most of you know their wonderful work. And also we have shared their articles. So today's event is not exactly a debate, but rather for us to identify these gray areas in these two movements, because they're neither black nor white. And the events that took place have to be studied in the context in which they took place. And so this event will more or less be similar to what we have been doing so far. We ask the scholars questions, and then we open it out for you. So we will, of course, we will have a healthy debate, hopefully, but it's not a debate between Matthew and Devika as such. So with that, I take great pleasure in welcoming Devika and Professor Matthew, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation immediately and doing this for our channel. And so, yeah, we start straight into our questions. Yeah, Aranyani?
Yeah. So because this event is the first of our events where we've had two speakers, we'll ask our questions to Professor Matthew first, and then we'll ask our questions to Dr. Devika, and then we'll open it out for everyone. So with that, Professor Matthew, our first question to you is: you're the first scholar who has looked at revival through a genre of composition. Can you tell us how you got to studying this? How did you get to India and then to studying Tamil Padams and finally to the issue of revival? Could you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thanks so much for the invitation, and it's an honor to be with Devika, Srimati Devika, as well as you. And faces filling the screen, some people who I do know and some people who I don't know. It's pretty amazing technology that we have here. I hope things come across clearly. So I've
Does somebody have to mute?
there's a noise. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I think we're fine.
I wrote, and I've taken a few notes because I got nervous, but I'll be sort of bouncing back and forth between some notes and you know, improvising here. But I wrote an article about 25 years ago in which I argued that most hereditary dancers in South India were unjustly disenfranchised of their art and livelihood as part of a series of events which included shifting the practice and in effect ownership of that art, that cultural property, to upper caste people. While I tried to balance this history by acknowledging that Rukmini Devi and others, Rukmini Devi here was an extremely creative and visionary, innovative artist and institution builder who in large part made Indian dance known and loved around the world. Still, my article focused heavily on a critical portrayal of her participation in the events of the 1930s and 40s. Today, I hope not to revisit and re-argue that history, but to acknowledge it as a part one, which is done, and to work with you towards imagining what a part two might be. What can be done today to leave behind the continuing hurt and the pain of the conflicting narratives about a revival of dance? And how can we move squarely into a 21st century narrative in which dancers, critics, and audiences from all backgrounds and perspectives have rebalanced the story of revival, have made it meaningful, have made meaningful amends where appropriate, have wholeheartedly come to appreciate, if not to love, each other's creative work. But that may be getting a bit ahead of myself. So as to how I came to study Padams, I want to give maximum 60 seconds or 90 seconds to an autobiographical moment here. You know, I started playing rock and roll, and in college I studied music theory, which it was a life-changing revelation because it showed me that there's a language to talk about music, a language to talk about the things I was hearing. Music theory was also in academia, and to a large extent still is, very Eurocentric. So music theory was all about European music. So that was my education through college was there, but I was getting more and more curious about, well, what are there other ways of doing music? Are there other systems? Are there other conceptual organizational principles that would teach me something I don't know from my little place in Connecticut? So raga and tala obviously were two things which I got more and more interested in over time. I was also very influenced by the writing of J. Krishnamurti, especially the way he talked about understanding and analyzing fear. And when I was reading Krishnamurti, I was getting more interested in India more broadly. And living in London, I remember I met some people from South India who invited me to a bhajan. And so then pretty much at that point, I decided I have to figure out, you know, I have to experience more. And while I was trying to make it in the music business as a popular musician, after a couple more years, I just dropped all that. And I found that I could go to study with a man named Vishwanathan, T. Vishwanathan, at Wesleyan University in Connecticut. So I came to Wesleyan, I met Vishwa, and I ended up in graduate school working with him for about 17 years. And over the time I got to know Vishwa, you know, it started out, our conversations were all, and our lessons were all about, you know, practice, Sarali Varisa, Gitam, Jatiswaram, then maybe Kriti. And then at a certain point, he introduced me to Padam. And it became clear the way he sang these and talked about them, that they were a very special repertoire to him. And I found out to his family, I found that pretty quickly. So that inexorably led me towards a PhD topic of analyzing Padams. At this point, I knew nothing about social history. I knew nothing about caste. All I knew was that this was beautiful music. Then when I had a chance with my wife, Julie, who's here today, to go live in India for a year, that's when I really started meeting people who told me more about the history and came to this idea of a revival. Okay, that's exceeded my 1 minute limit for my autobiography, but it just taught me what intangible cultural property meant on the ground level. You know, studying with Vishwa and his family, who were a family whose relatives, you know, had largely been disenfranchised from cultural property. So how did study of these padams bring to bear upon revival, the notion of revival? And here I have to acknowledge that that Amrit Srinivasan, who's in the session today, was really influential on me. The way she distinguishes between reform and revival in her dissertation, that was very eye-opening for me. So when I lived in India conducting research, I was collecting, you know, audio recordings thanks to V.A. Rangarao. I was collecting concert programs. I think Patabi Raman sir from Shruti magazine must have given me a lot of programs and articles. And of course, I devoured the pages of Shruti magazine in those early years. And when I sat down to think about, to sort of go through all these piles of concert programs and audio recordings and to sort of try to make sense of all this material, I ended up making one big chart, and I've got page 1 out of page 3. So Maha, maybe we could start the slideshow at this point and we'll just go in sequence through about a dozen slides.
Is it visible?
It's visible, just need to get to number 1.
Yeah. Yes, it's visible.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Can
okay.
people see okay? So I'll go over just briefly. The left column is the title of the Pallavi of a composition. The second column is the composer when known, the ragam and the talam. And then after that, it goes 1932, 1933, onwards to the right. So at the top there are the songs that I was able to document from one or another source as having been performed by G, and I believe G is my code for Gauriama, Mylapore Gauriama. So those vertically from the year 1932 going down, that just those 2 compositions were performed by Gauriamal, or they might not have been performed, but they were on the program anyway. So we can assume that they were songs which might very, very likely have been performed by Gauriamal in that year. And as then we proceed to the right, we see that by 1936, if you look vertically at 1936, and I hope you can all see the date. Oh, there's a little pointer. Okay, great. So 1936, the S stands for Swarna Saraswati, one of the Devadasi community dancers who was very popular in the day. So as you proceed further to the right, you see notations whenever I found a padam, a Tamil padam, and I didn't talk about Telugu padams at all, but Tamil padams, as you go to the right, the years increase. And if you look down at the bottom, the third from the bottom line, there's clearly one composition which had a popularity unmatched by any of the other compositions from about 1939. And the L there indicates that the first documented performance of this song that I found was by Miss Lakshmi Shastri, who later became Lakshmi Shankar. And that composition, of course, was Natanamadhinar, which became an important point in the article that I wrote, rewriting the script for South Indian dance. So I had to look at this composition was being performed by everybody for decades. And why did this come about and what does it mean? And so this became one sort of part of a tripod of different kinds of data. One was the career of Rukmini Devi and her involvement in the revival. Another was the career, if you will, of Shiva Nataraja, who, while always was a well-known deity in Chidambaram and in South India, in the 1930s and 40s, I argued, he kind of took on a different role that he had not played before, which was as a Nayaka. And this is when I talked to Kalanidhi Narayanan. I love the way that she described how Nataraja really had no place in the concept of a Nayaka, because he wasn't about Sringara, he was about Bhakti, and he was about, destroying impurities. She said, who you have to look for are Krishna and Murugan, because they were the love rajas. So the idea of being love rajas really touched me. So that song, Nartan Madina by Gopala Krishna Bharati, was clearly saying something, right? Its repertoire history was saying that this song was important at a particular moment, and taken in conjunction with those other forms of data and information, we can see how that would have been the case to be. Okay, Maha, could we look at number 2, please?
Sure.
And this was the key. So it's a little blurry, but on the left there, those are the dancers who I was able to document at least some performance of Tamil Padams during the period of 1932 up to 1945 or 50 or so. I won't take the time to go through any more of these, but just to show you kind of the scope of the data that I had. Could we look at number 3, please? So the very earliest concert program that I forget who gave this to me, but that obviously somebody did give to me, was of Mylapore Gauri Amal, who was famous especially as a teacher of Abhinaya, was, I believe, dedicated to the Mylapore Kapalishwara temple, or at least was of that community. So you can see things like a kite dance and lali, lullaby, the miscellaneous items after the Varnam had quite a variety. Could we see number 4, please? And the first documentation I found for one of the young Bala Saraswati's performances, and I have the whole program, which gave all the compositions which she supposedly performed that day, but for these purposes, I didn't want to put in too much material. So Nitirayel Sopanatil, that's one is the Tamil Padam she sung, and Mogodochi was a Telugu Padam, and then Kachirangan Kripai, a Kalyani Tamil Padam. And oh, did somebody want to say something?
No. Please carry on.
Okay. Next, let's look at number 5. So this was, the duo of Varalakshmi and Saranayaki in 1930. And look, we're now in the year 1933. So we just saw Bala Saraswati's performance, early performance. And now what interested me about this is that what I put up on the screen here is just the last segment of the concert. And you can see that there's a whole, like a medley, right? 9A, B, C, D, E with kite dance, plate dance, English note, Then another change of dress, hero and Nayaki, Nayaka, and snakes from her. So this was going on, right? This was, although I was specifically looking for the Tamil padams. Number 6, please. And this I reprinted in the article, so maybe you've seen it, but I found different advertisements. This was for a little book, the Mary magazine, which carried this story, which I never was able to find, although I did meet people who knew this publication. And this one taken together with one a little bit, I'll show a little bit later. To me, they ended up kind of framing the whole period. At this period, the sort of before, it's about Bala, the bad woman. And the fact that it's person's called Bala, who knows if that had anything to do with Bala Saraswati, the actual dancer. But it's marked by several aspects of the 1930s. You can see the musicians are not seated, they're standing and they're following the dancer as she moves. And it's clearly in a temple, which was about to be outlawed. But then look, as if by premonition, up in the upper right-hand corner, there's Nataraja coming in and beginning to take his place as an important figure in the dance. Could we look at number 7, please? So the earliest program I found with Rukmini Devi performing presumably a solo recital, not a a dance drama, but a solo recital, was 1943. Number 8, please. So here's the twin. Here's the after. Now Nataraja is front and center, shining, and now it's not about a bad woman. It's about your middle class kids. The dance has really been domesticated and brought into the higher social classes. And now, let your children dance to the rhythm. So these two, as I said, these two pictures, this one for gramophone recordings, really kind of bookended this historical period for me. Number 9. Another kind of information that was really important for me in looking at assembling the repertoire of Tamil Padams were these little thin books that were printed. This one was of the composition, the Tamil Padams of Vaidishwaran Koil Subbarama Iyer. And I found 3 different editions of this book. One was 1875, one was 1935, and I forget the third. But clearly, these songs had some currency, they had some popularity. And when you look in the book, it would give a raga, it would tell the raga that it was to be performed in, although it would not give swara notation, just the raga and the talam. And I started, going through all these books of compositions of not just him, but Ganam Krishna Iyer, Kavi Kunjara Bharati, Muthu Tandava, and others. So I got quite a collection of these books. And I couldn't resist including this, just to, the sort of language which was used in describing these books was so flowery and ornate. So I translated pretty literally on the left-hand side of the page. But so this was another source of data about padams in this period in history. So number 10, please. So I just give a couple examples of performance histories broken out a different way. This is looking at Teravil Varano, one of my favorite songs, one of Bala Saraswati's favorite songs. So it shows that this is what, again, this doesn't mean this is everything that was being performed, but it's the sample I had available to me. And you can see that it was very popular among lots of dancers in the 1930s, 1940s. Although the next one, number 11, please, shows how Nardana Dinar became such an important song. From another point of view here, it's broken out to highlight the dancers. And here you can see baby Kamala, who apparently made this a yearly occurrence that she, and of course I read this about Rukmini Devi also, that Natana Madinar was one of her 2 masterpieces that she would always perform. So this is how Nataraja became an important leg of my arguments about the history of revival as illuminated by data. And let's see, I guess there's maybe one more, number 12. Oh, there are two more. Yeah, so the exception to Nataraja being missing from repertoire performed as padams was when there were compositions on Nataraja, they were often in Ninda Stuti format, which is a praise blame, sort of can be kind of satirical and humorous. So those songs on Shiva Nataraja were in their repertoire definitely before 1930. And the last one, please, number 13. The Gramophone Sangita Kirtamritam was a catalog. Again, Vishwa and I were looking for books and documents everywhere we could find them. And I don't remember who gave this to us, but it was a 6-volume publication between 1929 and 1931, which basically listed every song that was released on gramophone records during that period of time. Again, giving the raga, the tala, and the sahityam. So that was a huge, mass of data that I was able to collect, not strictly with respect to the dance revival, but the other arguments I was pursuing about the classicization of raga out of tune, which is another subject. So that's how, for me, the data gathered from this history impinged upon my understanding of revival, from different ways. And I think that went way over your suggested time limit for a response.
Yeah. I was just going to say, please keep your next answers quite short. But the thing is, you've answered our subsequent questions quite well as well. So the next question that I had for you is, in your article, you talk about revival being a very complex process and the term revival itself being a drastic linguistic reduction of a whole lot of different processes, resituation, recontextualization. Could you just briefly touch on that?
On the various re's.
On the various re's, yeah.
Re's, yeah. And this, again, this is, when, well, my main point was basically that revival could mean so many different things. In America, in the United States, we had the folk revival in the 1960s. It was known as the folk revival, although some people who were humorists used to call it the great folk scare. But it was a revival in particular senses, material which was previously not known or perceived as previously known was rediscovered. But then things, not just rediscovery happened, a lot of other things happened too. So I argued that we really have to be more precise when we use the term revival. Just because the way that I found it being used in newspaper accounts and in lectures was really not nuanced in a way that would be helpful. So to me, that's, and I will make this a brief answer, that was what it was all about, was it behooves us to look at the other kinds of re's, the resituating, the replacement of performers, for heaven's sake. Those are important parts of constituent parts of what this revival involved.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the final question that we'll ask you, oh no, we have 2 more questions, but we see Rukmini Devi as the face of revival. However, you also address the influence of George Arundel in this. So how do you think that Rukmini Devi's husband affected the revival of dance?
Yeah, and this really brought me to the question of what was her agency, what was her power, what was her ability to make things happen, what was her sense of ownership. And this is when I dug a little bit and I found that she was married to the president of the British president of the Theosophical Society, who was maybe 2+ decades older than her. So that really, for me, complicated the idea of her agency. That is, let me go back to my script a little bit so I don't get lost here. I'm not at all an expert on Rukmini Devi's life. She became an important component for the story I was telling when I came across a quotation that had her approving that the hereditary dance teachers and dancers, those usual ones, were being replaced by those of good families. And she wrote, according to S. Sharada's book, she wrote, "A great new thing is the complete separation of our work from the dance teachers. They used to think no upper caste girl could dance. Now I was glad to prove we could do without them." Now for me to read this was a viscerally painful moment, to see such an unapologetic appropriation of a tradition in such celebratory terms.
Mm.
My reaction was eventually partly attenuated by the fact that that was a different era. And I was looking down the lens of a telescope to Madras about 80 or 90 years ago. So I don't intend to single out Rukmini Devi or India writ large in this respect, but I do struggle to understand why an otherwise visionary social actor and creative artist like Rukmini Devi could have held such an attitude, especially given the consequent loss of livelihood which ensued among, the people she was talking about. So this is the continuing question I have. And another element, about this time, I read Avanti Madhuri's soul-searching article, Bharatanatyam, What Are You? And had the good fortune soon after that to meet Avanti. She was actually the person who first recommended that I submit this article for publication. Her narrative in her article opened up to me the subjectivity of young dancers of her generation, perhaps most strikingly, the effects of the revival of dance on the narratives impressed upon young students by upper caste dance teachers. Avanti's article remains on my reading list every time I teach a course on the music and the dance of India because of the perspective she could bring on this. Okay, so as to what extent Rukmini Devi's husband, president of the Theosophical Society, was influencing on her thinking, that during the years they were together, here again, I don't know much. The source by Sharada was the main source that I found discussing this. Now, to put it chronologically, Arundale was born in 1878 and passed away in 1945, while Rukmini Devi was born in 1904 and passed away in 1986. Rukmini Devi started dancing in her 30s, which would have been 1935 or so. And then, so George Arundale lived another decade after that. So clearly, during the time they were together, they had a lot of opportunities to discuss all kinds of things. So they're said to have met when she was only about 9 years old, and they were married when she was about 16 and he was about 40. And apparently it was such a scandal that it had to take place in Mumbai. Their age differential prompted me to look for more specific details on their relationship. On this, I was only able to find this one main source. According to it, Arundale is said to have taken quite an active role in which padams she should dance to. So he seems to have been, determinant in the repertoire that she would perform. So the Theosophical Society is coming through Arundale, is coming to Rukmini Devi. He seems to have taken quite an active role. Oh yeah, and he seems also to have meditated in the wings of the stage while she was performing. And he seems to have said that through her, Lord Nataraja would rise and would help with Indian independence. I pursued what the information I could find about Arundale and Rukmini Devi because clearly before she took up Bharatanatyam and founded Kalakshetra in her mid-30s, as a child, she had been the intense focus of theosophical activity, which was not only spiritual, but in the Indian context, political, as Annie Besant had served, as the head of the Congress Party, for example. So who knows? I mean, I don't have much information, and I'm hoping that Srimati Devika will help us here, that he may have in effect kind of managed her career in her early years. This is all quite speculative, but for me, it added a new dimension to understand Rukmini Devi as more than just a dancer, but indeed an institution builder, a visionary choreographer, an innovator of new mixed forms, and so much more. So that's my response to that question.
I think on that note, we'll move on to Devika for her questions.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for answering our questions. I hope that we'll hear from you soon again once we're done with our questions with Dr. Devika.
And hopefully the two of you interact as well. Yeah. So thank you, Devika Akka, for being here and being with us today. So one of the first questions we had for you is, could you talk to us about who started the idea of abolition of the Devadasi Act, and how, like, what were the roots of, yeah, and what is pre Muthulakshmi Reddy look like in the movement?
I think the chronology of the move, the legal aspects are all there in it is available for everybody to read. But still, in 1868, the first formal anti-Nach movement is said to have begun, where people began to talk about, from the community itself, began to talk about the need for not dedicating young girls as Devadasis. And then this is a time when the colonial powers had already put in deep roots. Huge land holdings and zamindari systems were breaking down. Missionaries had started educational institutions, and there was an aspiration by whole lot of caste people wanting to take advantage of this education system that was coming up. And colonial government would recognize citizenship only with modern education and not to the skills of the traditional occupations. This was coming up at that time. Traditional occupations were not considered anyway part of that citizenship of the colonial time. And they also, native wisdom was considered vernacular tradition. What they did not understand was heathen and was kept away. And feudal system was slowly getting eroded. And the Brahmin upper class have now come into the legal system. There are many people who have become lawyers and judges. Slowly they were taking upper in this modern education. They had taken advantage of the modern education. And in 1892, the Hindu Social Reforms Association, formed by Veerasalingam. Veerasalingam is very famous as the opponent of Bangalore Nagaratnamma, and he fought for women's education. He fought for widow remarriage. He sent young men around all over Andhra to find young men who were willing to marry young widows. He was looking for emancipation of women. At the same time, he fought against Radhika Santvanam. He was publishing things that were what is considered erotic in nature, but he didn't want Radhika Santvanam because it was written by a woman. So this was the trend at that time, that men write for women, and the content can be erotic if it is written by men, but women cannot write them. They can perform it for men. This was the idea at that time. But anyway, when all this was happening, there was this young girl who was born in Pudukkottai. And all these days, I used to think that Narayana Swami had married Chandramal, but my latest information is that there never was a marriage, because nobody would marry them, because she was born into a community that was denied formal marriage. But Muthulakshmi Reddy herself begins her autobiography saying, "I was born to Chandramal." She doesn't say and Narayana Swami. Later she says, my father Narayana Swami. So she begins by saying, I was born to Chandramal. And she had, but there was this man who, like other men, could have just had a relationship with this lady and given her children, but had no participation in that, in their upbringing or their daily life or their education or anything like that. But Narayan Swami was very keen that his children should get educated, and his firstborn Muthulakshmi had to go to school, and she had to go and study with the boys when there was huge furor against her going to school. And she had, little urchin children are said to have run behind her bullock cart when she was going to school, that a Devadiyar is going to school. The word had become so corrupted by then. And so this was what was used against Muthulakshmi and her mother. Her mother had to undergo a lot of problems because she was not really practicing the form for which she was born and the customs. And here was a man who was looking after her, and he was participating in the upbringing of her children. But his family was not accepting her, So there was this dichotomy that Muthulakshmi Reddy had seen. And then she comes to Madras, and she becomes the first woman surgeon. And while in medical school, she starts going to Theosophical Society to listen to Annie Besant and others. Now, Theosophical Society has started countering Christian missionaries who had started big educational institutions, etc. And they are trying to bring in the Hindu ethos as they understood it. So they began to start schools wherever the Christian missionaries were starting, and they were trying to counter it with their kind of education. So here is Muthulakshmi, who comes to Theosophical Society to listen to some lectures, and Annie Besant asks her, have you read the Mahabharata and Ramayana, which she had not. She's introduced to these, and she sees the death of a relative, a young girl of 13, who dies at childbirth. And while she's keeping that child on her lap, studying for medical degree, she makes a promise to herself that she will see that this system goes, because the father of that child had nothing to do with that child. So for her, it became an important thing. And I have met Dr. Sarojini Varadappan was the one who gave me long interviews, long stories about Muthulakshmi Reddy. And of course, Matthew Allen's teacher, Savitri Rajan, also spoke to me about Muthulakshmi Reddy those days, when by the time Muthulakshmi had the agency to speak because of her modern education. First time in 1927, a woman comes into the picture. All these days, it was men who were talking for women, to abolish the Devadasi system and for women's education, etc. But in 1927, when she is nominated by Women's Indian Association to the Legislative Assembly, first time a woman comes into the picture, and she is fighting. Her first cause was to abolish the system of wet nurses among the upper class women. So when babies are born, they used to get a Dalit woman, somebody who is working with them, to come and breastfeed their babies out of prestige. That breastfeeding had to be done by a woman they had employed for it. She was also given breastfed. She was also breastfed by a woman who came to feed her. And she says that she was a very sickly child in her childhood because of this system. So first she began a campaign against the wet nursing system. And then she looked at equal property rights for women. She looked at medical facilities for women. She looked at 1927 became a very important year in the Legislative Assembly and for women, because between the First World War and the Second World War, and when British India was being challenged by Indians, and who may be nationalistic. I mean, we can complain that they were nationalistic, but then a new identity had to be found, because this was the first time that whole of India was coming together, and an identity had to be found as Indian identity, because earlier they were different princely states and they had different cultures in different parts of the country. So here was an identity that had to be found for Indians as Indians. And so because this, she started coming to Theosophical Society, started looking at women who were powerful and that they could do things. And she becomes a very powerful voice in the Legislative Assembly, fighting for all this. She had most opposition for raising the age of marriage for girls. Veerashalingam, who had also been fighting for raising the age of marriage for girls, was 16 when he married, and his wife was 9 when he married. So the custom of getting girls married under 9, and she was also helping Sister Subbulakshmi, who had started a home for young widows. And there are statistics to show. I wish I had known I could share my screen. I would have kept my PowerPoint ready with all the information, etc. I normally carry it around, but I I didn't think about it now. So um, she says number of total women married 95 lakhs to 217 lakhs. Age 0 to 5, 0 to 5, married 20,369 girls, 0 to 5, widowed 1,316. If a girl is widowed before she is 5, can you imagine what life she would have had? You know, considered inauspicious and not given anything in life at all. 5 to 10, 1,23,472 girls married, 6,146 girls widowed, 5 to 10 years old. And she, I mean, she gives further age in her autobiography. And then there is a biography written by Sarvani. So these were all the things that made her very angry. And she was having to face these upper class men who wanted women to be educated. At the same time, they wanted women to be the repository of culture. So they were the ones who had to be docile, and even if they were very, very powerful outside, they had to be docile and keep the culture. She had to fight with the upper class men, and Satyamurthy particularly, he was looking at the Devadasi system as culture. He was looking at it as culture, but she was looking at it as a completely inhuman act of getting young girls dedicated to become, to be marked as concubines, and that giving them the qualification to learn, to learn music and dance and perform in public, So why should that happen? She had seen her maternal cousins suffer, and she has seen what privilege her paternal cousins have, as growing up. So she was looking for, and she also saw that modern education gave her the agency and the power to speak and fight for the women. So the prevention of dedication of young girls as Devadasis bill became one of those, franchise for women, equal property rights for women, women's education, widow remarriage. All these she was fighting for in 1927. This became just one of those. And her husband and her father were rehearsing her, because she had to, dialogue with Satyamurthy in the Legislative Assembly. And 3 young girls come to her house while she's arguing this case. And it was never done in one stroke of the pen. It was, decades long argument about this. And they came to her house and they told her that they were running away from Bottu Kattudal, what did she have in alternate for them? So she said, come in. And she told her two sons, you have to call them Akka. And she keeps them in her house. And she tries to put them in a hostel, but hostels are caste based. And she had, even while helping Sister Subbalakshmi, which was a home for Brahmin widows, she had determined that when she started her away home, it would not be caste based. It would be for all castes. That caste would not be asked when she started her home. So she tries to put them in a hostel, but they could not be put in hostel. She tried admitting them in schools, but schools asked for the father's signature, and so she could not admit them in school. So she started her own Avai home. Why did she call Avai? Because there is a lot of argument against her that she was offering marriage, but she was not offering marriage. She was offering livelihood, an alternate livelihood that would remove the stigma uh, from having to be dedicated and to commit themselves to be only concubines, and and suffer the indignities because of that. I was not interested at all in all this. As growing up, I come from Mysore, where my sociological, I was very interested in the Nehruvian scientific development of India and all that. But, had seen performances of Bani Bai and all that in the Vinayaka Chaturthi pandals that was happening near my house, and very delighted to hear young Balamurali Krishna and DK Bhattamal, etc., etc. But I didn't know and I bought into the story that she had removed the dance from the traditional families, the dance and music from the till 1985, when I was asked to go and help away home in teaching some English to the girls and do a project with them, with Geeta Dharmarajan, who later started a publication house called Katha Stories. Geeta and I went to Away Home and began to work on stories, through stories. And the stories I heard, and the teachers that became warmed up to me and told me stories, completely asking me to keep it totally anonymous and that they didn't want to be identified. And I meet one woman who, at the age of 12, whose mother at the age of 12 had been dedicated in 1944, and she became a concubine to a man who was 46 or 48 at that time, and he would meet her only in the midnight. There would be no contact during the day, and he gave her 8 children. And later she came to know that he had another concubine also, and he had a regular family. That regular family children resented these children, and they fought, and they didn't want any kind of finance coming into this family. So she really worked very hard and brought up her children, and all she wanted was education, modern education for her girls, and to get away from the stigma of having the ancestry of dedicated women in the family. This is what drove Muthulakshmi Reddy into arguing for this case. So the chronology is there. In 1927, she tables this bill, and there is huge arguments, and Rajaji and Satyamurthy argue against it. And Rajaji says, I have to give this bill for circulation and for public acceptance of the bill, but that doesn't happen. And then the World War II intervenes, and in 1930 she resigns from the Legislative Assembly because Mahatma Gandhi was in protest against Mahatma Gandhi's arrest after the salt satyagraha. But she keeps up the pressure. She keeps up the pressure. She organizes seminars. She goes and meets women who are, and she sees those women who were arguing against her as those who were the privileged ones, who came from the upper class of the system itself. Bengaluru Nagaratnama was the one who led the women, and of course she founded a Devadasi society to argue against Muthulakshmi Reddy. But to know about how Devadasis were treated, you only have to read Bengaluru Nagaratnama's childhood story, how her mother was treated, and this enormous talent that Nagaratna had, and the extreme fortune of Narahari Rao's Judge Narahari Rao's support to her, that really brought out that power in Nagaratnamma to fight against the system. I mean, against Muthulakshmi Reddy. But Muthulakshmi writes to Mahatma Gandhi and requests him to ask the congressmen to accept this. And he writes in Young India that she is really working for this and she needs the support of the congressmen. But Satyamurthy, who is seeing this as a culture and not as women's issue, fights. This is the story that happens. And then in between 1930 and 1947, the World War had intervened, and it was in 1947 that Subbarayan took this case and got it passed as law.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you for that, Akka. The second question that we had for you has already been answered by you in the first one. So I'll move on to the next question. When we were listening to talk, it seemed as though you're looking at the, when you say anti-notch movement, you're talking mainly about the anti-dedication to the temples. But I mean, there's a lot of focus in your talking about the social aspect of it in terms of the dedication of young girls, but not so much about the Devadasis as artists or as dancers. So how would you explain the unhappiness within the Devadasi communities today about, well, I mean, at least some of them, at least the ones that, many of them that we
I mean, there are no Devadasis now because there are no women.
No, I mean, yeah, okay. The hereditary communities and the descendants of.
So I don't know why they are angry with Muthulakshmi, because Muthulakshmi was only trying to give them the freedom from being tied. Okay, so I will quote her maternal niece. Okay, her maternal niece was one Srimata Sai Mata Shiva Brinda Devi. Sai Mata Shiva Brinda Devi was the daughter of a relative of Chandramal. Okay, she was the daughter of Shivarama Natavanar and herself an accomplished Veena player herself. And she did a Sabarimala trip when she, taboo age. And she became the first woman head of an Adinam in Pudukkottai. She gives an account. I'll quote Sai Mata Shiva Brinda Devi. Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy, my maternal aunt, was a great social reformer, besides other accomplishments to her credit. Avvai Home, founded by her to help and guide thousands of poor girls, is yet another banyan tree in Adyar. Whenever I visited her house, she used to talk with me tirelessly about the upliftment of women. It was she who fought for legislative. She says, Sai Brinda Devi says, Sai Brinda Devi lived in the house of Chittur Subramanya Pillai, and she studied philosophy at Annamalai University and later became the first woman head of a mutt, an Adinam. Whenever our talk turned towards the Devadasi question, Muthulakshmi Reddy revealed the great anguish she felt, because in those days it was common to abuse a girl of any community for using even cosmetics by asking her rhetorically, "Why do you make up like a Tevadiyar?" Applying facial makeup was not the habit solely of the Devadasis, but the abuse directly or indirectly pointed towards them. Only she was always targeted for criticism without knowing the meaning or its reason, The term Devar Adiyal had come to be corrupted and misused in a nauseating manner. My Periyamma, Dr. Reddy, agonized over this state of affairs and resolved to remove the stigma attached to the Devadasis. This was the real reason for her moving the bill. None need think it was a move to protect members of this community from immorality. This is what her maternal niece, Srimati Sai Mata Shivabrinda Devi, has said. So it was not, morality was a question that she was that was in currency those days. So and you must remember that at that time, being the first woman in the legislature, she had to really be very powerful and use very powerful language to retain power in the middle of those men who were legal luminaries. She had to argue with them. So she had to be very powerful and she had to use this kind of language then. So I also say there is a paucity of research as to how many within the communities would like to claim the Devadasi legacy themselves and want to reclaim it. Odisha government had announced that they would like to appoint Maharis in the temple, but there was no application. I have seen Mysore Dasara with Jayachama Rajendra Odair, and I have seen his son Shrikanta Datta Odair campaigning to become an MP, a member of parliament. He lost once and he won once. But I had classmates who belonged to the royal family when I was in college in Mysore, and they resented this freedom. They said, the glory of the royal family, the glory that was there, it is all lost, and things like that. They kept on talking about it. I'm not comparing the two, but I'm just saying that the glory is what is remembered, not the indignities that was meted out to these people. Nagaratnamma's glory we can see. Matthew Allen is talking about revival into spiritual music, but it is an ironical thing that it was a Devadasi, Bengaluru Nagaratnammal, who revived Tyagaraja's compositions and gave life to Tyagaraja's Samadhi. So it's that what is needed for the time, isn't it? For the time, the context at that time, what was needed was done by these people who were there. So I don't know why the Devadasi community or the people there should be angry with her, with Muthulakshmi Reddy. Do they want to go back and have a job in the temple? Do they want to apply and
on that note, how would you respond to my statement? Non-conjugal relationships do exist. Dance still exists. Dancing for male entertainment also exists today. But why do the Devadasis alone have to go? How would you respond to
the question itself is an answer. When all this exists, why have young girls dedicate themselves and commit to becoming a concubines? When they grow up, if the situation demands, they will decide whether they want to have an extramarital relationship or non-conjugal relationship or not. It's their prerogative to do it. But if an elderly member tells them when they are 9 or 10, you have to commit your life to becoming only, having only non-conjugal relationship and not have the rights for the man's child name or inheritance, do you think that it should stay? When there is relationships going on, it's the prerogative of the couple, the man and the woman, to have a relationship or not. Why should the system allow it? Why should young girls be dedicated and made to undergo this? I don't understand the question at all, because the question itself is an answer. When it exists, why have a system? So when there's always a non-conjugal relationship, but it gives the man a right to have his cake and eat it too. Here today, DNA test can give you the name of the father and you can claim his name You know,
Okay.
then even if they knew who the father was, there was no way they could claim it. You know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Akka, for answering our questions. We would now like to invite Professor Matthew and you to ask each other a question each, if you would like.
May I ask Professor
Yes, yes.
Matthew a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Professor Matthew, the tradition of elimination has always been there. Elimination to suit the performance and the audience and the context has always been there since Silaparikaram time, because Madhavi talks about vilakku. Vilakku is the description about Madhavi is that she was skilled in eliminating certain things from her repertoire to suit the occasion, the audience, and the time she was performing in. And that term was called vilakku. So, don't you think that the times demanded the kind of elimination that was done and the kind of trajectory that the compositions took? Because the artists looked at what was getting popular, what was getting accepted, and that was performed more.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to avoid a direct answer because you're raising one of the big questions in my field of ethnomusicology is, should we be trying to save the past, preserve the tradition, worry about losing that wonderful tradition that we had? Or should we make a space for innovation? Should we be allowing and encouraging something that, yeah, it's not being done the way it was done last year, but there's something in it which is worth doing. I mean, I could see going to either position within the music I'm familiar with. I have students who are like, if it isn't brand new now, it's worthless. And I have students uh, who want to dig into that history and will literally cry tears for the loss of it.
May I?
Yes.
The question was also that there are a lot of parallel things that are going on. That there is a niche audience for the kind of valuable padams that are there. There is also an audience for a popular kind of. This was there forever, I think. Even in the Nayak times, I'm sure there were people who were, crying over the fact that so much Telugu has come into the compositions and that the old Tamil compositions are not there. And when Kshetraya came in and took over, or, there's always uh, um, the question. Even Kalidasa says that he's lamenting about the loss of tradition. So don't you think that every dynasty that ruled Tanjavur had its impact, just as we see the way the architecture changed over the dynasties, art, literature, performance, social life, and even the Devadasa system itself must have undergone several different ways as it flowed with the tradition, isn't it? It's always the patron and the audience that determines what performance is, which is why English note came into being, and the kind of padams that were used, javalis that came in to force, etc., isn't it? So it's the audience that kind of looks at that determines what the artist is going to perform that night. We think about who we are performing to, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, there's one more perspective is that one of the quotes I always like to talk with students about is I forget who it was exactly, but he was a musician from Nigeria. It might have been King Sunny Ade, I don't know, but an African musician, and it was asked, how come you're using a pedal steel guitar? And of course, the pedal steel guitar is associated with Nashville and country music. And he said, oh, ours is a very modern tradition. So while one person is crying at the loss, another person is saying, this is the lifeblood. Yeah, it's always been changing.
Always.
And Matthew, do you have a question for Devika?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've already started to have this conversation last week in another Zoom session, but you wrote me back, Devika, about some of the things that Rukmini Devi is supposed to have said about it's proper and just to take away the art from an unworthy social community. I mean, how do we deal with that? How do we process that in the 21st century? What can we do to understand that?
Yeah. So we take quotations from out of context, and we many times place them and speak against personality. But I can tell you two stories. One is Shakuntala, a French dancer who came to Kalakshetra to learn Bharatanatyam. She's still dancing in France. She was given a scholarship only for Kalakshetra because an institution scholarship from government to government. But she found that her friends learning from Muthuswami Pillai, she found that was much more interesting for her. So she used to steal away from Kalakshetra hostel, go in the evening and sit in Muthuswami Pillai's class and learn. That is when I met her. I used to go and sit in his class. I was a student of Dhananjayan's, but I loved Muthuswami Pillai's way of teaching because he constantly changed. The way he taught and the same Varnam to Angelika Sriram or Malavika or Maitreyi, completely he was changing. And I was fascinated with the way he would just sit there and get these girls to perform in so many different ways. So this question of Shakuntala going away was found out by some of the teachers, and they took her to Rukmini Devi. And Rukmini Devi is said to have told her, "You like that? Of course, he's from a great tradition." And she said, "We've got this all from them. It's that just that I am changing it to the way I want to change it, the way I want to perform. That's all." So if I have no problem if you go and learn with Muthuswami Pillai, and I will give you a letter if you need for your scholarship. This is what Rukmini Devi said. And when I had asked her, I was sitting in Sharada's house one day, and suddenly a car came in the Theosophical Society, and Rukmini Devi got out of it. And as a young girl, I was so delighted that I was being so close to Rukmini Devi, and I sat like this, and she was very kind to me, very sweet. And she said, I told her I'm Ramachandra Rao's daughter, and she said, "Oh, really? How nice," and all that. And then I just told her, because I told her that there are people accusing you of taking away the dance, because she told me she had just read my piece on Pandit Ravi Shankar's concert at the Kalakshetra, and she said, I liked it very much. She said, I said, there are accusations for you. She said, "Why would I take it away from them? I am doing the way I want to perform. They are free to perform it the way they want. I will work with people who agree with my ideas." This is what she said. So there are parallel things that can go on at the same time, isn't it? So I don't understand this accusation that that quote that you have taken may have come, may have meant individuals, that with whom she had a difference of opinion. I don't understand that. And yeah. Okay, next.
Yeah.
Sorry, that answer your question. Does that answer your question?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have some questions from the viewers. Tony, would you like to ask your question?
Or let me see if I can.
Yeah, there he is.
Yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Namaste, Devika. My question is to you.
Yes.
Thank you for the insight into Dr. Reddy's life. This is something that you've never come across. But I'm also very interested to know if Dr. Reddy had analyzed what her opponents at the Legislative Assembly had against her. Did she have something to say about the loss of the culture and the dance that could possibly be eradicated or wiped out with a newfound freedom that is given to a community which she thinks was completely subdued? So I just would love to know if she, in your talks with your mentors, if she had something to say about the dance and the culture associated with this community, which was constantly evolving, considering the socio-economic situation in that time during India. That's my question. Thank you.
She felt that the dance was allowed because of the dedication. The public performance, music and dance, was allowed to them only because they were dedicated. So she wanted to separate the two. So she said that it should be made available to everyone who wanted. And I believe there were arguments between her and Rukmini Devi, when Rukmini Devi said, no, the dance in the temple should continue. And I don't know if there is any record of that, but I was told by seniors at Kalakshetra that there had been an argument between Muthulakshmi Reddy and Rukmini Devi. Rukmini Devi saying that the dance in the temple should continue, but Muthulakshmi Reddy saying that why should the girls be told that they cannot marry, that they should only be concubines? Why is it that the Tevaram singer or the others are not given the same condition? So let them work in the temple. If the temple can say, let them be professionals. Why and let music and dance be available to everybody, was Muthulakshmi's idea. She, the opponents were looking at culture. She was looking at livelihood, and she was looking at getting out of this stigma.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vaishnavi, would you like to answer? Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, Devika ma'am. So being a feminist, I obviously enjoyed reading about Muthulakshmi Reddy and knowing about her life from you also. At the same time, I was also wondering if, yeah, I mean, when you were talking about how she worked for the emancipation of women and wanted to give freedom for women, right, to be able to do what they want to. And I'm also wondering if the ban also meant a loss of freedom for the Devdasi community to choose for themselves, because there might have been a lot of them who wanted to continue perhaps, but the ban stopped it. So I'm wondering if there would have been a different way to look at the emancipation of women from this community. And there's a middle ground there.
Vaishnavi, the ban was not the dance. The ban was the dedication and performance that was connected only to the dedicated people. So she wanted to remove that. She was not looking at the proscenium performance or outside performances, because
yeah, which is fine. Yeah. So I'm just wondering whether there might have been many women, the ones who are dedicated, who wanted to continue, But because of the ban, they had no choice. But someone like Rukmini Devi that you
that is the gray area in that, because she wanted to cut it at that time.
Yeah.
She wanted to cut it at that time because she didn't want more girls to be dedicated. Because if the profession of girls in the temple or the dedication continued, that means they would adopt a girl from a poor family, dedicate her, and make her commit herself to being only the concubine. And that giving her the freedom, the qualification to learn music and dance and perform it in public. That was removed. But the revivalists came later. The word revival is a very difficult word, we know, but we know that from 1930, during the war years and after the war years, the performances had dwindled quite a lot, mainly because of the debates that were going on, the public getting more and more interested in modern education that was giving them the citizenship ideas. All the traditional skills were being overlooked by the British. And all the traditional skills were mired in caste and gender. So they needed to, this modern education was giving them the opportunity of seeking what they wanted to seek. But girls in our home were trained in music and dance, as I heard. But this dedication of young girls was what she was completely against.
So would it have probably...
Sorry. No, continue.
No, it's okay. I was just thinking if there would have been a middle ground where the ban could have been about the relationships that were maintained, or something, and let the dance continue, or the temple dedication, if they wanted to allow them to continue.
Absolutely. I think it should have been the job continues, but not the dedication. Something like that could have been there. That is the gray area here. She just wanted to settle those who had the lands, settle the lands with them and get them out of the temple, because there was a lot of exploitation of women, and that only women were being exploited. So she wanted to get them out. And her support also came from the Justice Party and those that were fighting Brahminism. So the dedication and the suppression of women in the temples also had its roots in Brahminism, isn't it? So it's a complicated network. So those things were also being fought politically in this area. So her support came from them, from the people who were supporting this Brahminical ideas of subjugation of women and their sexuality.
Sure. Thanks a lot for answering. I hope I get more time to discuss this later, because I come from the lineage of Devdasis. So there's a lot I would love to know, but yeah, due to time, I'll stop now. Thanks a lot for answering.
I had interviewed about 25 to 28 girls who came from the community, and all of them made me promise that their names will not be revealed. They one generation removed, they are fine. They say that modern education has given them the choice of what they want to do. Their children will get modern education and their children will learn music and dance, is what they are telling me. So it required a generation gap to remove that. And I know that it's a gray area. There are several who resent it and who feel that the question that she was raising were against them, while it was for them that she was fighting. So it's a very very complex.
Yeah, because the consequences of it is still continuing even in my generation. So there are certain consequences which is not very well known for people, but it's there in our DNA, and there's a lot of shame and trauma associated after the ban.
Absolutely, so absolutely. But there are also many who have
been able to get out. What
an equal number, or I don't know, there's no survey done.
Yeah.
That if there was a survey done as to how many of them now in this generation would like to claim that legacy and would like to go back to the temples. I think it might be interesting if a survey was done among the communities.
I might be one to put a hand up.
There's a paucity of research on that.
Sure. Thanks a lot for answering.
All right, Avanti Akka, are you there? Do you want to ask your question, please? Yeah, Avanti Akka.
You unmute yourself, Akka Avanti, Dr. Avanti. Akka, you have one.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I can't see Matthew. It's difficult to ask a question. I can't see him. But this is a question to Matthew, really. Hi, Matthew. It's been a long time. I still can't see you. I see you now. It's been a long time since we met. And I just sent you an email this afternoon. Matthew, I want to take up that question that you posed so poignantly and powerfully in your rewriting the script for South Indian dance. That quotation where Rukmini Devi breaks. Breaks with the traditional practitioners. As you know, in my dissertation, I devoted an entire chapter to this transition. I called it bittersweet transition, right? And marked this moment, highlighted this moment as the important moment when the transition is occurring into, the formation, the post-colonial formation. But anyway, that was a dissertation in 1996, and a long time ago. It was a very preliminary charting, of the whole structural transition. But subsequently, and because this term appropriation has caught on, right, has caught the imagination of scholars from that time on to now, continuing into the present of the next generation, right? I wrote an article, 2004 publication in Dance Research, but I revisited this quote and this question that you posed, where she appropriates the tradition. And the question I posed, not to you, but to the community who's following the discussion, and I now pose it to you as a question. Yes, she might have broken with these teachers, yes, these Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai and the family, but Chokkalingam Pillai comes back to do the Nattuangam, right? So the relationship between the teachers was not broken. And Rukmini Devi's commitment to the Guru continued right until her end, until the end of her life. So how will you explain? See, this is the problem when you take and sensationalize, take a quote out of context, revisit that quote retrospectively from a 1990s point of view, right? When water has flown under the bridge, as it were, and the appropriation term has stuck as a period term, right? There is the quote itself is invalid, because unless you situate it, right, that she did this within the context of the 1940s and the actions before and after, it is just pure politics and it is just speculation, Matthew, right? So the question again, since it was rambling, let me say it again. She had continued her commitment to the teachers right until the end of her life. Chokkalingam Pillai came back to do the Nattuangam, right? And it was a strategic decision made by Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai to voluntarily go back to Tanjore. And so that then, of course, what happened because of that decision is Ram Gopal and the rest of them went to the village to learn the dance rather than learn it in the urban center, right? So there's the whole complexity of the town and the city and authority and modernity. All of these questions have not even been raised, you see, within the whole revival history, because what blocks the whole discussion, right, is of course this term appropriation. And what blocks the discussion is the non-engagement, the reluctance to engage with modernity as a structural happening, as a structural transition. I end. So that's a question to you, you know?
Well, yeah, I agree that a term like appropriation can take on its own life. And I agree that, you know, the information I had when I was writing, I didn't really know the half of the story that you're talking about. You know, and I mentioned when I was talking earlier that I just had this one source, the book by Sharada, so that I received that
book,
quote.
Matthew, sorry to interrupt, that book itself is written in 1985. Your scholarship is in 1990s. She's already dead and gone, right? And we have taken this one quote out of context to make an argument of appropriation, you know, to put that upon her as a frame, that whole history, and then extend that appropriation argument to the middle class.
Well, you know, I agree totally that appropriate context is vital to understanding any kind of a allegation or a statement, you know. And when I write, I do the best I can to provide the context I'm aware of. You know, I agree that it's vital, and that a term like appropriation, you know, I would like to be able to illustrate it more fully than I was able to.
Yes, I think we should put it, and you have to lead, because I mean, I think it started there in America, right? This discourse. I mean, I was tentative. I used the term, but I realized how, you know, it was a very complex term, fully charged. I mean, Amrit used it too, but I refined it and nuanced it because it was such a charged term. And even I questioned the term revival, like, you know, and you know that. But even to substitute the term revival with another term is problematic, because these are period keywords. You know, revival was a period keyword that consolidated right up until was consolidated right up until 1990s. You see, so and then we have this appropriation as this new term. So
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Akka, but talking about revival is the second question. It'll catapult into a second question, so I have to stop you. I'm so sorry, but I know that you and Matthew know each other, so you can carry on.
We'll pick this up later. Thank you, Aranyani. Yeah.
But I would just like to say that Mahalakshmi and I were discussing Professor Matthew's article, and I mean, in the lead up to this conversation today, and I mean, I think we also agreed that just like the term appropriation, even, you know, material that is written has to be seen in the context and the time at which it was written. And I think Professor Matthew's article was written in 1997, and I think the way that the term appropriation is used today is quite different to the way that the term appropriation was used by Professor Matthew. I think that's also something that's important to note. No, I mean, now it's really, it's like as Professor Matthew was saying, the term appropriation has taken a life of its own. And
no, Aranyani, the term is used exactly in the way that Matthew continues to be used, in the way that Matthew has used it, which is that the middle class, Rukmini Devi specifically, appropriated the dance form from the hereditary communities, and that appropriation happened in 1942-43. There is no difference in the way it is used then and it is used now. There's only one term, and we're using it in the same way, ahistorically.
Okay, I think we'll have to agree to disagree there. And I hope that Professor Matthew and you can continue this conversation elsewhere. Who was next to ask the question?
And like
I think
Professor, we had the conversation with Professor Matthew. The question right now is not in the past, but how do we honor and critique and go ahead? And which is why we are here. And I mean, yeah, and the term that he used and when he wrote this was back in the 90s. And we're not looking to criticize. Yeah, anyway, there is a question from Yashodha Thakur.
No, actually, Yashoda Akka had a comment, but she hasn't sent it. She hasn't sent it to me yet.
Can I
Yeah.
Can I say it to him, Aranya?
Yes, yes, yes. Where? Sure.
I'm yeah. No, I just want to thank both of you for bringing Professor Allen here. And it's such a pleasure, sir. I have read, I'm from the community too, from the Kalavantalu, the Telugu side. I wish you would do some work on the Telugu Devadasis also. But I just want to tell you how much your article and your writings have impacted us and my students also who are studying this. Just want to thank you very, very much for your work, sir. I can't see you, but I'm sure you can hear me. That's it.
I hope, Professor Matthew, I hope you heard that.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay, okay, great. So that was Yashoda's comment.
Yashoda, I just want to tell you how admiring I am of your stance and the way you have performing. It's fantastic, beautiful. And the fact that you decided to be a dancer, that it was your personal choice of becoming a dancer and bringing out the family tradition. It's fantastic the way you are performing. I really, really am full of admiration for you.
Thank you, ma'am. And your talk has been enlightening for me too. Thank you very much.
So you have asked who decides what morality is and who decides what worth is, you know, and I think none of us have any answer to that. Is this a question against Muthulakshmi Reddy? Or is
no, but it's just a general question where people become so judgmental and they come to these conclusions.
Absolutely.
Who is to decide who is moral and what is morality? You know, who defines morality?
Yeah, exactly. So
and why is morality always connected to the body and sex? Why not to other vices? Why is it nobody talks about those?
Absolutely, absolutely. You are absolutely right, because that the morality question was the word in currency at that time.
Yeah.
Later, it became human right, and now the word in currency is, I think, decolonization. You know, appropriation became the word in currency later. Human rights became a currency later. Now the new word on the block is decolonization.
Because I think the word morality has also come from there. It's I don't think in this land there was something called morality. There was more humanism.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was influenced by the Victorian ideas of the body and etc. You know, because 200 years of British ideas being forced upon the people here, and the modern education that was given to us.
So it's about time we shook it off now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have a question from? I think Dr. Palaniappan had a question for.
For Matthew.
For Professor Matthew and also for Professor Devika. So please, Dr. Palaniappan, go ahead and ask them both one by one. I hope he's there. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, this may be an interesting question from a sociological point of view. In one of the slides you showed, one of the books or the albums was released in the presence of a Katha Kalakshevam performer and a Saiva Siddhanta expert from the Goldsmith community. You know, we know about M.K. Tyagaraja Bhagavathar, early superstar who was from the community. Have you looked into participation of other castes like the Goldsmiths in the music dance culture in the 1930s or earlier?
Oh boy, I don't know anything about that. I don't think you're telling me something I did not know at all.
Oh, okay.
So you're asking about what was the participation of different castes in the music at that time?
Yeah.
What do you know?
Well, you know, the fact that Tyagaraja Bhagavathar, he had been trained in music, they must have some tradition within the community. And the fact that your slide showed that's obviously a prominent member to be brought to the release function and given a role, it looks like there must have been some people from the community, not only Kadakar Shebam, which was an important contributor to the development of music and other genre in the early 20th century. He was also a religious scholar, it looks like, Saiva Siddhanta expert. So some of these things, I just picked it up as I read through the slides. We still haven't explored the whole complex scene, sociological scene behind the dance and music scene. I just wanted to explore that. That's all.
Yeah, well, you're reminding me that when Vishwa taught me a song, I think a song, Saurashtram, a raga called Saurashtram. I remember him telling me that this was actually a raga which took the name of a particular caste community who may have been involved in, the cloth trade in Madurai or something like that.
Right.
But, to do that kind of research, my Tamil would have to be a whole lot better, to start. It's a really fascinating question.
Okay, and this question is for Ms. Devika. We were discussing the middle ground between, total ban on the hereditary community and giving them a role in the temples. I was reminded of the preferences given to Chakyars and Nangyars in Kerala, Kuttambalam, where only they have a right to perform. Of course, nowadays, others are also performing Kodiyatam, but there are some traditional spaces only they are allowed to perform. So could something, a middle ground like this could be organized even legislatively so that, the lack of opportunities in the Sabha system can be mitigated to some extent by this?
Absolutely. Also, the legislation was not the performance by a community. It was not the community, performance by a community. It was the dedication again and again, dedication of young girls. That was the legislation that was, tabled by Muthulakshmi Reddy. And, Rajan performs, isn't it? Rajan and his family, they perform Kodiyatam. But Kodiyatam, it's such an incredibly, fantastically intense performance that it requires Sahridayas of the highest order to sit there and enjoy it, isn't it? It is now legislated as UNESCO, intangible heritage list of UNESCO. The government of India has named it as an element in the UNESCO list. So these are the things that can be done, I suppose. It's always it's the people who have to support. If you look at our tradition of Kuthu, there are Mahabharata Kuthu festivals that are taking place in the northern villages of Chennai, Tamil Nadu. Some 300, 400 villages perform the Mahabharata festival 10 to 40 days sometimes. And it has continued more than 1,000 years of continued and performance, mainly because it is not patronage oriented like the Sadar or Bharatanatyam. It's supported by the villagers. It is the village contribution, individual contribution from the village that has kept that. It is the state patronage that is the problem normally when arts depend on state patronage, that they have to undergo mutations according to the power that are there at the moment and what they desire and what is the patron desire. Those kind of transformations continue to happen, I guess.
One more question to Ms. Devika. You were talking about Muthulakshmi Reddy and interaction with the Kalakshetra, the Theosophical Society per se. According to Dr. Ambedkar, Annie Besant of the Theosophical Society was very particular about segregating depressed classes children from upper caste children, and she opposed common schools.
Yeah.
This attitude towards purity, cleanliness, what kind of impact did it have on Muthulakshmi Reddy's attitude towards viewing herself a community, or any solution to this problem?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can't give you quotations on this, but I have discussed this issue. She was looking at cleanliness. She was looking at purity, but she was very particular about all castes being part of her away home. And that was her particular interest in that. And this is the way, the reason also, one of the reasons that Gandhi went away from Annie Besant. And Muthulakshmi already also, after her school days, after her college days, once she became very busy with the Women's India Association and the Legislative Assembly, and starting the Cancer Institute and the maternity home, and training young girls into midwives, becoming midwives, starting the children's hospital in Madras. The number of things that she has founded and she has worked for, it may not have had time for her to be involved in the Theosophical Society at all. And this is what I was told, that in the later years she did not interact much with them, though the land that she took for Away Home was situated next to the Theosophical Society. She bought a small piece of land next to the Theosophical Society to set up her Away Home. South of that land was a coconut grove belonging to the Arunachalam temple in Tiruvannamalai. And in the war years, the soldiers would be put in tents near there in 1942, and they would come for girls. The soldiers would come for girls to Away Home, the thatched huts that she had built. And she stood vigil in the nights with a big stick. And then she went to the war memorial and she told the superintendent, the in charge of the Army Southern Command, that if any soldier comes, he will be held responsible. These kind, she had to really struggle to get that Away Home going. And later, the trustees of the Annamalai temple leased the land for her to expand Away Home. And that is how Away Home is there in the Besant Avenue now in Adyar. That's where hundreds and thousands of girls of all castes are. Of course, the upper classes want to go to private schools. And Away Home is looked at as a school for the poorer girls. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Unmute yourself, Aranyani.
Always, at some point of time in the event, I will do this. Yeah, so I kind of had a question and comment. It's a little bit long, but please bear with me. But this is for Professor Allen. I remember reading your article for my dissertation in 2009 and being profoundly affected by it, actually. And the way I read your article, it seemed like an extremely balanced view on Rukmini Devi and revival, in the sense that I mean, it wasn't disrespectful of Rukmini Devi at all, but it was also not uncritical of what she did. And I definitely see the problems with what Rukmini Devi did and the shortcomings in her vision, but I'm reluctant to vilify her, or anyone for that matter, for any one person for what's happened. So when you say that it was viscerally painful to read Rukmini Devi's words about the hereditary dancers, and then you went on to ask this question in the beginning of your talk, how could she, who was such a visionary, have such an attitude? I felt that, I mean, this has been my question too for a long time, that, she was so visionary in what she did, so how could she have overlooked this? But I think actually, as you read your paper later on, it kind of you can see that you're attempting to answer that question for yourself when you talk about, you know, Ruth St. Denis and particularly Anna Pavlova. And I mean, you go into aspects such as her relationship with her husband and how Rukmini Devi didn't have as much agency as one might imagine. And then you talk about her relationship, her possible relationship with her father, and the relationship, and particularly what was very striking was her relationship to Anna Pavlova. And I was wondering, I mean, and you add to that the pressure that was on someone like Rukmini Devi in the immediate aftermath of post-colonial nationalism. You do seem to be trying to answer this question that you asked. And I was thinking that maybe for the viewers, it would be useful to for you to kind of expound a little bit on the relationship that Anna Pavlova and Rukmini Devi had, and the influence that Anna Pavlova had on Rukmini Devi. If you could talk a little bit about that.
About Anna Pavlova and Rukmini Devi, I don't know much more than I've written in the article. What was interesting, you know, to get a perspective, was that Pavlova did the same thing in other countries. You know, she's famous in Spain for seeing flamenco dance and saying to the practitioners, why are you dancing in this dirty little hut? You should be on the best stage in the country. So Pavlova definitely had that missionary zeal towards presenting dance in an honorable, you know, prestigious setting. And I know that she's quoted as having said, I want to dance for everybody in the world. So I'm familiar with it, just to the extent of that seems to be the attitude she brought to her encounters with people like Rukmini Devi. But I'm sorry, I just don't know any more about, you know, except what I've read and reported in the article about how they met and how.
Yeah, I mean, what I was actually asking you to tell us is, I mean, I don't think we should assume that everyone who's here has read the article right at the end. So if you could just tell us about what you said in the article about the relationship between.
Sure.
There is no relationship between Pavlova and Rukmini Devi. They met just but twice in their life in a performance venue. There is no enduring legacy there, or relationship or friendship. I mean, she went backstage to Anna Pavlova and said, oh, you dance so beautifully. And she said, please come and learn the dance if you want to, when she was in London. That is Rukmini Devi. And Rukmini Devi never went to that class. But that inspiration of Anna Pavlova remained with her. That is the story we know. In history. In history.
Well, that's the story that I was asking Professor Matthew to tell about the and also, I mean, if I may find it in the in your article, which I will try and find now. Yeah, what you say, what she had said about, you know, to what Anna Pavlova had said to Rukmini Devi about go back to your own country and, you know, go and revive the dance forms of your own country. Don't come and try and learn ballet and all of that. That's essentially where I was trying to hear this discussion, just to demonstrate that, you know, Rukmini Devi was also possibly someone who was you know, influenced by that particular kind of thought as well, where you know, there was the inspiration by Anna Pavlova to go back to her own country and revive her own dance forms. And I think, and that's possibly where you know, her motivation to do this also came from. All right. Well, I guess let's. That's basically what I wanted to bring out. But should we bring?
There is Lavanya who has a question for Devika Akka.
Yes, Lavanya.
We close Lavanya and Adya. Yeah. Lavanya, your question for Devika Akka, please.
Namaskaram, Devika ka. Well, as always. Um, Akka, my question need not be considered as an argument and an answerable thing. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And notwithstanding the point that Yashoda Akka, am I not audible? Am I audible?
You are.
And you're audible.
My question popped up before Yashodaka's question on morality. So I'm not at all bringing in her view. I mean, I totally respect her for what she said. But would you consider it correct if I said that in the current day, whoever calls themselves as having come from the Devdasi tradition, like the criticizers of Gandhi would be criticizing Muthulakshmi Reddy because they have not endured what then the Devadasis endured. She being somebody who was aware of the medical consequences, aware of the genealogical consequences, having undergone the trauma of being an illegitimate child, which I got to know just now. This is something I was not aware. Sorry, I have a very sore throat. And all the other consequences of her relatives, the maternal, paternal imbalance, so on and so forth. Today, just like I mean, a lot of Indians who are happily living in the free India have the right to rebel against our own government, against our own things, would not have had we been born before 1947. Similarly, she having brought in something, it was not related to morality in my point of view, it was related to freedom of the oppressed. So I don't think morality actually should be brought in. Second, my real question is this. I'm brought up in Delhi. I knew Muthulakshmi Reddy as a first surgeon and as somebody who was part of the, this thing. But I was not aware of the Devadasi tradition being suppressed till a long time when I grew up, and I wanted to find out like maybe my 16th, 17th year or somewhere 15, not through my school or my textbooks. It was because I was interested in the art that this came as something to me. We were taught about Ram Mohan Roy, his social reforms, everything at a very early age, but this hero was never brought to our knowledge as a hero.
Lavanya, may I interrupt you? This is the reason why I began to talk about Muthulakshmi Reddy. I started going around giving lectures, and I wrote to different organizations, and I said, I want to talk about Muthulakshmi Reddy and her life because it's not known at all, especially to dancers, and students. So I began to go around talking about her. And, the more I speak, the more I learn. There is somebody who's telling me, the other day I learned that a lady who was secretary to Muthulakshmi Reddy is 96 and she lives in Tiruvannamalai. I just took a car and went straight to Tiruvannamalai. I just the minute I heard, I drove one straight down to see her, and I wanted to hear about the day-to-day life of Muthulakshmi Reddy. And I have been meeting several people who have been associated with her. And the stories I heard, this is what, away home girls and teachers telling me the stories, those completely changed me, mesmerized me. And this is why I'm telling her, that, not that there are no dark things there. It is just like Rukmini Devi is being criticized for what she did was what she wanted to do. She just, I had Avanti, I did a long interview with Shankara Menon for about the establishment of Kalakshetra. I recorded them all on cassettes, the small cassettes, the square thing. And so he was telling me that Anna Pavlova, meeting with Anna Pavlova was, as you said, very brief. And Aranyani, she didn't tell her to go back home and improve your dance or anything like that. She asked her, have you seen Indian dance? And Rukmini Devi said, no, I have not seen. Have you seen the dance of your region? Because, in a small talk, I believe Anna Pavlova has just told her, I have seen your dance and it's beautiful. And that triggered off an interest in Rukmini Devi to explore and want to see the dance, which is why she came back and she went to people who could help her see the dance.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are saying the same thing, and so is Professor Matthew, that
Yeah.
basically
So it's not like Anna Paula were telling her, go and improve your dance or anything
Oh,
like
no,
that.
I never said that.
Aranyani, could
Yeah.
I come in there?
Yes.
Despite your best efforts, it seems to have become very personalized. There's
Yes.
Avanti bubbling over with rage, and there's Devika bubbling over with admiration. For Muthulakshmi, I mean, I think it's unfortunate because personalities don't make history. That's what sociology teaches us. They are just part and parcel of it. And we should look at it more as Ninda Stuti, that we are trying to see the critical aspects of both traditions, though we want to know more about them. But there's been so much on one side which has been presented, which is unfortunate. I think we've learned more about, Devika ji, I don't know why we need to build up Muthulakshmi if she's so great. Muthulakshmi is like 100 other reformers of that time, including Catherine Mayo, who wrote Mother India, who wrote
She
that.
was, yeah, she was, yeah,
She
reacted to Catherine Mayo.
And she was a surgeon, and she dealt with the dance like a surgeon. She threw out its heart. And to say that dedication is not linked is like saying that the JEE exam is not linked to IIT. Can you enter IIT without the JEE exam? You can't. Similarly,
exactly
you
what
can't dance without the dedication in those days, because there was no birth control, there was no event managers, or it was a different time. So I don't know why you are saying continuously that was only against dedication, only against. To kill dedication was to kill the dance. I think everybody should be clear about that, and it has.
Don't you think that it required that surgical?
No, I have read people from the community so timorous, so tentative.
No, Amrit ji.
I'm not talking
to kill the
about
dance. To kill the dance.
Avanti, let me just,
and Yashoda, with this glorious tradition behind them, they're saying, if I may I? And there's Avanti sitting there raging away. For whom? For some woman who was made a star of the East under the J. Krishnamurti decision to lead the youth. I mean, whatever, I don't care about either. The issue is to talk about the issues at hand and not people and not the personalities. The fact is, she did have to learn it from the Devadasis. How did she learn the dance? And then I never use the word appropriation, by the way. That's a very postmodern word. I never used that word. I just said that she had to learn it from the community. There was no dance choreography. How else would she learn it? She had to learn from the Devadasis and from Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai, who did not want her to have a Arangetram so quickly, but she insisted because she was a Brahmin and a theosophist. So how are you going back on this history? I'm not
did you want the dedication to continue?
I mean, look at, why are people out there fighting the Supreme Court to enter Sabrimala? Why do they want to enter the temple?
I know. Why do they want to enter the temple?
Answer me. Why are they wanting to enter temples? Why are modern women fighting with the Supreme Court to enter Sabrimala today? A simple question. Simple question. No, not everyone. Those between the age of 15 and 40, whatever's not allowed. So answer that. Also answer if you think the Brahmin custom or any upper caste custom of pre-pubertal marriage is fine. That was like a dedication. You didn't sleep with your husband.
It was not. That she fought.
Marriage
fine. She fought against that. She fought against marriage. She fought for of marriage.
That in India, where we have arranged marriage and dowry system, people are here talking about the choice. Girls don't have the choice as to who they can marry even.
Amrit, no. I have the choice of not getting married.
No, I'm sorry.
Married.
I know of.
No. Please don't talk about that to us. No,
No, I think we should be
there
aware
is,
of
there is,
sociology and not just the hagiography.
there
There's a
is, there is,
sociology, and
there
in a
is,
country which has arranged marriage, dedication is not a sin. In a country without arranged marriage, both are sins. But where we have arranged marriage and where a girl is tied in marriage to a first cousin or a second cousin is as sinful as a dedication. For those,
absolutely,
I don't
that
think
is
so.
sinful. That is
I don't
sinful.
think,
Not
I don't think so.
dedication is as sinful as that.
No, I think let's
Sinful
open
as
our minds. Let's
arranged
talk
marriage.
about dance and
I'm
not.
sorry. I'm sorry. I have a choice to remain unmarried.
I mean, we heard a lot about people who won't talk. I heard as many Devadasis cry their heart out that they lost power. That they earlier the mathas would send them gifts. Were
Yes,
they
I
lying?
also heard, as I told you, I also heard the
I
royal
have
family crying that they lost strong.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak loudly, but this I've been said that I used the word appropriation. I did not. I've been told that only dedication and not the dance. What nonsense! There are quotations from that same legislative assembly which I have read for my PhD and written about, where she says she doesn't care about the dance. It's the dedication which must go. It's very categorical.
Yes.
We have to have facts, please.
Yes, yes.
In the legislative assembly debates, which I read for months.
I have also read it for months.
It's not a political position for me at all. I'm a Sardarni from the north. I don't care about this Brahmin, non-Brahmin nonsense. But I care about the truth. And she did say, I don't care. If the art has to go, let it go.
Exactly.
She called dedication
exactly what she said. Yes, dedication must go.
Let's accept and let's not paint over the past. If young women from the community today are timorously asking, should we, may we, can we, it's a shocking situation. They're not free. They're still feeling the stigma. It's not right. Why are they feeling the stigma?
Why are they feeling the stigma?
That's all I want to say.
Why
and
are
I
they
think we should care for them more than
the stigma was before the act. The stigma, the act came because of the stigma.
Sorry, Aranyani, that's the teacher in me.
Can I just make one comment?
I'm sorry there are many more dance scholars here. But I strongly believe that issues are more important than personalities.
Absolutely, but the personalities.
That's why we titled this Reform and Revival and not Rukmini Devi versus Muthulakshmi Reddy or
yeah. That's why Jekyll and Hyde, your title is neither are Jekyll, neither are Hyde. It's the issues and the arts are in a terrible way today. They are not the same arts. Aranyani is right. They're not dancing the same dance. She opened my eyes to that. She told me in the first meeting, we're not necessarily dancing the Devadasis dance, which is true. It's a different dance. But when Rukmini learned it, she learned it from the Devadasis. Sorry, that I will sign in blood.
Yeah.
She couldn't have learned it otherwise. Yes. And if she didn't learn it, Aranyani could have learned it today.
Absolutely not. She could not have learned it from outside, but she made it her own and she made all of us savor it. You know, if Aranyani, Avanti and I or Lavanya are in it, it's because of her.
Again, I just want to say, ma'am, Amrit ma'am, thank you very much for what you said. You really voiced it so beautifully. And if you say that it was about the economy, no, ma'am, when you took them out of the temples, what would they eat? Nobody thought of that. The identity was completely lost.
Yes.
Besides that, you said only temples they were not allowed to dance, but because of the act, they were not allowed to dance, at least in the Telugu land, in the marriage pandals and festivals, nowhere. And today, lawfully, I'm not supposed to be dancing according to law. Anybody can put me in jail because I'm dancing, because the law still persists. Is this valid?
No, it's not valid. Absolutely not valid.
So how? We cannot accept the act, ma'am. It has not done us good. And just one more question. Just one more question. Why is it's only the women who are spoken about? Why not the men who were involved in all this? Why isn't anybody researching about the men and the society at that time who brought the state to the women?
Absolutely. You know, that's what I was talking about, that the woman stood against them and got this done. It's a woman, and it's the men were all for it.
But it's only one woman with the help of all the men of the community who got this done, ma'am.
Also the women, also women.
I am not so sure, because it's mostly the men, because I speak to the men from the community, and it is not flattering when you talk to the men from the community. And you know, it is they who gave strength to Muthulakshmi Reddy to bring this act out.
They were jealous of the women. The women were the stars of the Devadasi community. And this was true even in the north. The Bais are were the stars of the Kotha. And slowly the men have taken over and become the new singers. And now there's a majority of men in the field. There's hardly any women singing. Sangeet Natak Academy Award list has hardly any women remaining. They're all in their 80s or dead. Because the men have taken over. Pulsikar and Digambar and all those people, what did they do? They kept the women out of AIR. I'm talking about a different context, so you don't think it's only about the South. Or
Yes,
only
and Kathak too. Yes, ma'am.
It's to do with women and talented women. Women who could sing a man out into oblivion. They were so good. People went to see the women and to hear them. It wasn't salacious. Look at the clothing. There was nothing salacious about the Devadasi's dance. Even the British said, I don't know why they want this to go. It's perfectly, they felt Victorian morality, that the woman's fully clothed. That's the first thing they said. I mean, and it's a solo dance, crucially. I mean, the whole focus is on the woman. And then later, Rukmini makes it into a dance drama. Naturally, as she said, that more untalented people also get a chance. That's what it became, a hobby. It's an amateur hobby today. It's not a profession, except those who are performing it professionally. Well, that's why I say these young people have to come to terms with this history and change it. Otherwise, as Sarah said, we go on about the same things. You young people have to change this history, you know. It's time we moved out of it.
I also want to, what made me on the inside is the word, just using the word necessary elimination. It just gave me the shivers. I don't think we can use such language. It's been a very, very violent erasure.
Elimination of the pieces, not the dancer. I was talking about the vilakku that Madhavi talks about.
I don't think we can call it necessary elimination, because that really doesn't go down
well. That's not identity. You know, it's understood through contest and always contestations and persistence and elimination of certain cultural.
And also, I thought,
always been like that.
Isn't it time we contest the whole term classical, which
Absolutely.
was in the revival?
Totally.
Because that created this false sense of hierarchies within forms.
Totally.
Hybrid and diverse dance and dance theatre forms.
Absolutely. We need to remove that classical and folk. Those don't belong to us at all. They are not our...
Yeah, thanks a lot, Samrita, for your comments. And also, yes, I think...
If you call me, you stand in trouble. But I have all respect for everyone. I just feel some things need to be said, because a lot has been said on the other side.
Oh, absolutely.
But no personalities
The point of recognizing dance is
to
for
have
these
a debate, a healthy.
Okay. Yeah, so it's, I mean, and for these kind of issues to get thrown out there, and for people to be asking questions and going away from these events thinking there's something to think about, and there is something to change, and there is something to savor, and there is something to discard, and whatever we we want to incite thinking and questioning. So and this event did that. So yes, but of course we did get...
Aranyani, I promised Adya for one last question she has for Matthew. We will close with that. Matthew, you can take Adya's question and give your closing comments, and we will Adya, quickly.
Thank you very much. This is like This is like a kucha pecha presentation. I have 20 seconds to ask my question. Okay, so fascinating discussion. And I actually teach Dr. Matthew's text and Dr. Srinivasan's text in my undergrad class. So this was like and Avanti with Dr. Meduri's text in my class. So this was like a class discussion taken live. My only question to all the scholars here who have been discussing is this, and I think Dr. Srinivasan really put it in context. What can I do with this history? What can I do with these contested questions in my class today? How does it matter to a 19-year-old today? How can I make it matter? And what are the issues that this contested discussions then throw up for a North Indian kid who has no direct connection with dance as such, comes into a liberal arts university, takes a dance and national identity class, and gets exposed to that. And so how can these questions move beyond just dance, but also to the way we see justice, equity, marginalization, and those questions that are at the fore of our life today? That was my question.
I think that's for Matthew to take, and
it's actually for everyone. I mean, whoever wants. I mean, that was my pedagogical question, because I teach history and all of that as a part of dance pedagogy. That's what I work with. But so that's a pedagogical question. How do I make it relevant today?
Well, I developed a course on music, identity, and nationalism because I saw my undergraduates, and this is, 19-year-old Americans in Boston. I saw them coming to class, and, I would be their advisor and talk to them about what was going on. And clearly, they're all trying to figure out their own identity. They're all, so that led me to build a course around, some texts that would include, how Brazil declared the samba to be the national musical genre in 1935. I mean, to me, how do we reach? I don't know. That's my very partial answer. It's just that I took the cue from what I heard my students talking about.
I think we need to move beyond appropriation and beyond nationalism, Matthew. You know how much I respect your work and I teach it. Right? Appropriation is a polarizing, dead-ended term, and it is inaccurate. It didn't describe what happened in that context of the 30s and 40s. Appropriation happened not just because the middle class took over the dance from the hereditary community. There were other kinds of appropriations that were happening. So appropriation is as it is used today, is a politicized term. As it was used then was a politicized term. We need to move beyond this term. And I think I use the term tense collaboration, or a paradoxical collaboration. You see, appropriation is too simple. The teachers had the power. Devadasis did not have the power. There were two people at the source of this tradition, not one.
So what I'm coming away with in terms of closing, remark is that over the last half hour, I've heard all these narratives. I've heard bits and pieces of about 8 people's different narratives. That is to say, how they see the situation, what's important to them. And to me, it may be a naive remark, but what I would hope to see is that the space to have those multiple narratives, the one doesn't cancel out the other. If we can figure out a way that everyone can have their space, then maybe you can have a dialogue.
I think that's a great place to end, because actually that is precisely what Re-Cognising dance is trying to set out to do, is to bring about multiple narratives and to see how these multiple narratives can coexist and how we can find a way forward from these multiple narratives. Thank you, Professor Allen, for making these remarks. And thank you, Dr. Devika, for being here to answer all our questions and to be a part of this lively discussion. I'd also like to thank all of you, all of those scholars, dancers, students, teachers, everyone that has asked questions today and has been a part of this discussion. And we really, really have to close now because it is almost 9 o'clock. And I think Mahalakshmi is going to have a very hard time uploading such a long video on YouTube. so let's stop. And good night, everyone. And we hope to see you at our next event. Maha, do you want to say something?
No, I was just saying there is nothing personal about any of our discussions. It's a very academic and a very be it for Devika or all of us, it's only to find the gray areas. And like Matthew said, we need to find a more democratic space where all our thoughts and ideas can coexist, right? And I want to end on that note. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devika and Matthew.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.